Now that we've had a chance to do some modeling inside of Maya, both with NURBS modeling and polygon modeling, we can move on to some other important areas of the program. One important part of any 3D program, such as Maya, is the ability to render. Rendering allows you to create an image or a movie or a sequence of images that reflect the final quality of your 3D scene. Now, so far, we've just been looking at models in the view panels. For instance, here's a chair I built earlier. Now, view panels are fine for modeling and for positioning objects like lights. They don't give you the full quality that you would need, for instance, to provide an animation for a project. So you have to render. Well, how do you render? Well, in Maya, there's two main ways to render. One is to use a render view window, which allows you to create test renders right inside the program. And the other is to batch render. And batch render allows you to render out a movie or a series of images and have those written to disk so you can export them to another program if you need to. We're going to talk about batch rendering later. For now, we're going to discuss some basics of the render view. So how do you get the render view up? Well, there's two ways to open the render view window. One is to go to the shortcut button up here on the status line. That's a picture of a little clapboard. You click that and the window opens. And in fact, it renders the current active view. The other, if I close this, is to go up to Window, Rendering Editors, Render View. And this is a separate window that opens up. You can position this wherever you want. Now, it's rendered the active perspective view, but you can render out any camera that you have in the scene. I can go up to Render in the menu, go to Render, and pick a camera, for instance, the front camera. And there's the front view. Because this is a light scene, in other words, there's very few polygon faces, and only a single model, this actually renders very quickly. If you had a more complex scene with more models, more polygon faces, other things like lights, complex textures, the render would definitely take longer. You would see the render appear little piece by little piece within this view. In any case, there's a front view, and it matches what you see in the front view panel. Now, you notice that the chair in the render is gray, and this is true no matter which view I render out. For example, the perspective view. This is because Maya assigns a default material, which is gray, and also assigns a default lighting because I have not placed any lights yet. So you wind up with a roughly lit gray shaded object. And this will be true until you create your own custom materials, your own custom textures, and place your own lights in the scene. But at least the Maya defaults are enough to see what's going on. So you can render out any camera you wish to. Another trick you can use inside the render view is to render out a snapshot. And that's a great way to quickly see your camera view inside the render view and then allow you to select a region to render out a small region. If you want to do a snapshot, just go up to Render, Snapshot, and pick a camera view, like the perspective view. So Snapshot, Perspective, and there's your wireframe. So Snapshot is a wireframe. That's great for really quickly placing your scene in the render view, and then you can drag a box, click drag a box, to select the red region. So click drag, you get a red box when you let go, and then what you can do is go to the Render Region button, click the Render Region button, and render out just that region. Now you can also do that when you have a regular render. I can go up to Render, Render Front, for example, get the full render of the full frame. I can still drag a region box and simply render that region to update that region by going to the Render Region button. Now the reason for that is it's often nice to update just a small area. So whether you create a snapshot first or do a full render, you can click drag a box to concentrate on a certain region and then render that region. For instance, if I had made changes to the texture or to the lighting and want to just see how that might have affected that small area, I can render out that small area. Because again, if you have a more complex scene, rendering out the entire frame, when you choose render, render, and then your camera, could potentially take longer. It could take so long that you'll see that the render incrementally renders a little piece at a time until it's completely finished. So you can re-render as many times as you want to in the render view. There are some other things that are good to know about the render view. One is you can use your camera controls inside this view. If I press Alt and middle mouse button, I can scroll, or I can press Alt and right mouse button and zoom or dolly. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you might have a very large render resolution where it doesn't all fit within your render view. Or you could have gone down to one of your corners of your render view window and changed the size. And you see that Maya tries to adjust the size of the render when you change the window. So by being able to scroll in DALL-E, you can look at different areas of your rendered image. Now keep in mind that when you do DALL-E inwards, you might not be seeing the true quality. In other words, you might see some rough edges due to the pixels being blown up. So you want to make sure you're looking at the correct quality. You want to make sure you're at a 1-to-1 zoom ratio. And in fact, right here in the window it says zoom, and right now it says 1.9 or so. That means it's zoomed in to almost 200%. I'm not going to see my true quality. I might see large blocky pixels on my chair. If I want to be in the 1-to-1 zoom ratio, I can go up here to the 1-to-1 button, click the 1-to-1, and I can see my true quality. Now, my render is still a little rough here. In fact, if you look at the edges, you see a little bit of what's called stair-stepping. That's because my anti-aliasing quality is not high enough. In other words, there are quality settings that you can set to determine how polished your render is. Now, we're going to return to that later. But for now, just keep in mind that if you do want to see your best quality without changing your global quality settings, you want to make sure you're zoomed into 1.0. And again, to do that, just go up to the 1.1. So those are a few basics of rendering to the render view. We're going to return to this and talk about file formats. We're going to talk about alpha channels. And again, we're going to talk about critical quality settings such as anti-aliasing, which you'll see reflected in this view as we do additional renders.